Hello, fellow Aussians. So in case you haven't heard, Wicked is absolutely mermazing. I'm not even gonna beat around the seaweed. The film is awesome. I absolutely adore this film, just like everyone else. Is it perfect? Not exactly. But then again, considering that Wicked is my favorite Broadway musical and therefore I have a high standard, it's pretty flippin' great. I would go so far to say it's my favorite film released this year. Though that's not saying much considering I haven't been impressed with many films released this year. Before anyone says anything, no, I haven't seen The Wild Robot yet, but I still plan to. However, I doubt it'll match Wicked Part 1. Now before I begin, keep in mind this is just my opinion. If you disagree with what I say, that's fine. Just don't be a about it. Also, I will try to keep spoilers for the end of the video, for those who haven't seen the film yet. Though, can you really spoil something that is an adaptation of something that's over 20 years old? Now let's follow the Yellow Brick Road to the wonderful world of Oz. First of all, I really won't be going over the characters themselves very much because they're pretty true to their characterizations from the musical. I will start by saying that I wasn't that impressed with Jeff Goldblum's performance as the wizard. Don't get me wrong, he wasn't bad in the role, but I feel like he didn't have enough of that high energy that is needed for the character. I get they wanted to tone things down for the movie to appeal to a wider audience, but I felt like Jeff Goldblum's energy didn't go far enough. He had charisma, but I feel like they stripped the character down a bit too much to the point where I don't really think he'll be convincing with how the character manages to charm Elphaba during the song Wonderful. Speaking of which, his vocal performance was also lacking, as I suspected. This isn't a problem with characters like Madame Morrible, who barely sings in the original musical, but it's going to be a problem when his mediocre singing really can't capture the charm needed in part 2 in the song Wonderful. They should have cast someone like David Hyde Pierce, Kevin Kline, or Alan Cumming in my personal opinion. Michelle Yeoh did a great job as Madame Morrible, though the character herself was much less flamboyant, which I blame more on the film being more grounded and less campy. While this doesn't make her as fun as she could be, I do think she still is a lot of fun because of how poised and sophisticated the character is. She manages to pull off the faux mother figure to Elphaba while also being cold to Glinda. While this version of the character is a bit different from her stage counterpart, it still works, and that's thanks to Michelle Yeoh's performance. Michelle Yeoh unfortunately has the weakest voice of the cast, even weaker than Jeff Goldblum, but as I mentioned, that's not a big issue given the character doesn't really have many vocal moments in the original show to begin with. Jonathan Bailey was absolutely charming in the role, and was one of the standouts. He has a great voice, is a charismatic actor, and brings a lot of likability to the character. I actually think he managed to make the character more likable than his stage counterpart, though that could also be because the writing does expand on him a little bit. While his voice isn't as strong as the other Fieros, he feels more developed, and it shows with his interactions with Elphaba. Ethan Slater did well in the role of Bach, though the character is less developed in this version, so we don't see much of him. Marissa Bode was really good as Nessa Rose. I do wish the character played more guilt trip on Elphaba, but Marissa did a great job showing this insecure but also spoiled and low-key bratty character that isn't a very good sister to Elphaba. Her singing was also good. Not great, but I don't think Nessa is a character that needs to have a great voice, because I feel like her more limited range suits the character being someone who is more isolated from the world by her overprotective father. Ariana Grande honestly surprised me with just how good she was. I mean, I knew she would deliver vocally, though she even surprised me there as well, but her acting was one of the best in the film. She managed to be comedic without being too ridiculous, which is impressive considering how over the top the character is. She made me laugh every single time, and I don't think it would have worked without her. She was born to play Glinda. She made good on her promise that she would take such good care of Glinda. But the number one standout was definitely Cynthia Erivo as Elphaba. What can I say? She's pitch perfect, both in terms of acting and singing. She was born to play Elphaba and proves that. If she doesn't win an Oscar for Best Lead Actress, there's no justice in this world. She honestly gave me chills so many times while watching this film, both vocally and with her acting. She just is Elphaba, and I can't imagine anyone other than a young Idina Menzel being better. Not to mention the chemistry between Cynthia Erivo and Ariana Grande is immaculate, and I am so thankful for that. The heart of the story is the friendship between Elphaba and Glinda, and the actors don't have chemistry, then the relationship doesn't work, and if the relationship doesn't work, then the movie doesn't. But these two are great, whether they're bickering or being friends. It's just perfect. The rest of the cast also does a really great job, so this whole movie was a home run when it came to the cast, apart from Jeff Goldblum. this is an aspect that I'm very mixed on. First of all, the sets and effects are amazing. The sets and costumes are lavish and gorgeous. Glinda's wardrobe was one of the biggest highlights. I adore her wardrobe so much. I love the sets are handmade and practical with CG mixed in to make it grand but also tangible. The only CGI effect I didn't like was the hologram of the wizard. That just looked dated and poorly rendered. But the rest of the effects looked great, especially the animals, the magic, and the flying scenes with Elphaba. It was just phenomenal. However, there are three glaring issues I have. The first being that the color grading sucks. While it's better than most fantasy films that come out nowadays, it's still lacking and feels so washed out. It makes these gorgeous sets and costumes look lackluster. It still looks nice, but these colors should be popping out because it's the world of Oz, which is supposed to be colorful and magical. It should have done a modern take on Technicolor to invoke the look of the 1939 Wizard of Oz film. Let's bring back super vibrant color in film again. Another issue is that the lighting is atrocious. The dark scenes look good and you can actually see them, but the scenes where they're outside or by a window are just too bright and washed out the film even more. Another issue that makes this worse is that it was shot on a digital camera instead of a film camera, just like most films nowadays. This gives it a sharper and harsher look that doesn't work for a fantasy film. It makes it look cheaper, like it belongs on a Netflix. Film cameras give movies a softness, texture, and personality. It's more cinematic. This just amplifies the flaws of the visuals and makes it look too generic, which is an insult to this incredible film. So yeah, the visuals are my main issue with the film and something I hope the sequel fixes, but I doubt that it will. It's still beautiful to look at for the most part, but these issues hold it back from being the visual marvel that it should be. I'm just gonna say it, the soundtrack absolutely slaps. First of all, the original musical has one of my favorite soundtracks of all time, so this movie had a lot to live up to. I'm glad they got actual singers to play these roles because you need vocal powerhouses to bring a majority of these songs to life. Do they hold up next to the original cast recordings? Absolutely not. But they do a great job reimagining them and making them entertaining in their own way. They even add little additions to make them more interesting. However, I will say that they definitely don't hold a candle to the original version, so try your best not to compare them to the original cast recording and just think of them as their own thing while still being faithful to the movie Broadway style. The ones that I felt were brought to life the best were Loathing and, of course, Defying Gravity. They're done so well and take advantage of being movie musical numbers, but I also appreciate how songs like I'm Not That Girl managed to let the scenes be more intimate. The big production numbers are impressive, even if the color grading and the sun-drenched lighting aren't always the best. Had those been improved, this would have honestly been one of the most impressive looking movie musicals I've seen. The choreography was phenomenal, and I actually got chills a lot of the time from Ariana and especially Cynthia, particularly during Defying Gravity. I was also genuinely shocked that they didn't add any new songs to the film in order to get that Best Original Song nomination. That's incredibly rare with movie musicals that are adaptations of previously established musicals, but I honestly kind of respect it for that. Since this is taking the first act of the musical and turning it into a film, there are some things that are expanded upon and added into the film. Some were good and some were pointless. One of the things I didn't like was the inclusion of characters like Glinda's friends and Miss Coddle. They add nothing to the film apart from lackluster comedy in the case of Glinda's friends. Yes, I know Glinda had 2 or 3 nameless friends in the musical, but they were never given much attention like these two. They had no real purpose and I often forgot they existed. It would have been better just having Bach be her lapdog, as it would show how desperate he was and display more of how he's in love with the idea of Glinda rather than Glinda herself. In the case of Miss Coddle, I forgot she was in the movie and she had no real purpose and was an absolute waste of Keala Settle's phenomenal talent. But apart from that, I honestly think that the additions were great. I love that we actually get to see Elphaba get magic lessons from Madame Morrible, as it helps with her development and make the reveal of Madame Morrible's portrayal all the more sad because of how she acted like a wise and and loving mother figure to Elphaba. Plus, I always found it weird that in the stage show we never saw this. Another minor addition I loved is that we got to see Glinda's parents, which showed how Glinda had parents that adored her to the point where they spoiled her and endlessly doted on her. It makes a nice contrast from the life Elphaba lived. Another addition I really loved was that we get to see Elphaba's childhood. It's a nice touch that adds some depth and even explains how Elphaba turned out so kind-hearted despite her upbringing, which was thanks to her nanny Dusselbear, who was a talking bear, and makes Elphaba's fighting for the rights of animals even more personal than it already was. Plus, showing the scenes from her traumatic childhood makes her development even stronger and gives us a full circle moment during Defying Gravity, which I'll discuss more in the spoiler section. Speaking of which, to go into more depth about the Defying Gravity scene, it has Elphaba nearly falling to her death when she jumps through the window and she sees a reflection of her younger self as well as flashbacks. She reaches out to her younger self and ends up grabbing her broom. That is a truly powerful moment that shows both empowerment for Elphaba and the advantages a movie has over a stage show. You can play around with things like this and it makes for such a cinematic and deep moment. The visuals during this are nothing short of magnificent. This was absolutely cinematic. Another spoiler I'll get into is that we got a cameo appearance from the original Elphaba and Glinda, Idina Menzel and Kristen Chenoweth, and it's not minor. They get to sing a big portion of the song One Short Day. I'm sorry, but they stole the show. I adore Cynthia and Ariana in the roles, and they were perfectly cast. However, Idina and Kristen will always be my number one Elphaba and Glinda. This was such an awesome cameo, and I nearly lost it when I saw it. So if you can tell, I absolutely adore this movie. Is it perfect? No. Are there things I personally would have done differently? Yes. Is it as good as the original musical? I'm not sure if I'd say that, but I think that's because of the color palette, filming, and the lighting of the film. But honestly, if you're a fan of the musical, I think you're gonna love it, and I think it's well worth the long wait we had to go through. It has not replaced the original 1939 film as the best Oz film by a long shot, but it's something that I feel will be its own classic that generations of people will adore. I know the big question is, does Wicked justify itself being a two-part film? Honestly, I think it does. One of the complaints Les Miserables had was that it had too much story crammed in, despite it being the same amount of story that the stage show had. And if I'm being honest, with The Sound of Music, I like the first act, but think the second act with the Nazis is ridiculously boring, despite that that's what happened in history. So yeah, I think that this works as a two-parter, especially since Act 2 takes place years later. I feel like it would have been too jammed if they tried to adapt both acts into one movie. But maybe one day we'll get an edition that'll have both movies as one flowing film. Plus, with all the political issues going on these days, and the issues with the world in general, it's a movie that we desperately need right now. So I highly recommend you see this film. You won't regret it. It's an absolutely wicked good time. And those are my thoughts on Wicked Part 1. Did you agree with any of my thoughts? What are your thoughts on Wicked Part 1? Let me know in the comments. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. You can also follow me on my other social media accounts in the links below. I'm the Wicked Merman, and there's truly no place like home.